On the way, I felt as if someone was following me, but when I turned around, no one was there. Just as I reached my front door and was fumbling for my keys and my purse, a strange-looking man with bulging, bloodshot eyes and a gruesome smile suddenly grabbed my wrist. Terrified, I grabbed his hand, kicked him, and screamed at the top of my lungs for help. He gave a manic laugh and let me go. I ran to the door, pounding on it and calling for my father. When my dad opened the door, I collapsed into his arms, crying as I told him what happened, but by the time we looked back, the man had vanished. The next morning, I was watching the news and was horrified to hear about a murder. The victim was a girl around my age, killed right in front of her house, her wrists slashed with a sharp object. The killer had left a note. She didn't try to fight back, so I killed her, accompanied by a smiley face. My heart nearly stopped because I was certain it was the man I had encountered. I dare not think about what would have happened if I hadn't resisted, hadn't screamed, or if my father hadn't opened the door. I currently live in South Korea. During my freshman year of college, I suffered from a recurring nightmare. In the dream, I was a woman wearing a hanbok. Furiously, I dragged a young girl into a courtyard, beating and slapping her. Despite the girl's bloody face and her desperate pleas for mercy, the woman who was me just laughed. I pushed her down a well at the edge of the yard. As I approached the well, she looked up, smiling through tears, and told me to slowly enjoy the game. Haunted by this, I consulted a fortune-teller who suggested a past life regression. To my shock, my past life matched my dream perfectly. I had been a cruel woman, jealous of a servant girl named Sean for her beauty and talent. When I overheard my parents planning to adopt Sean and marry her into a noble family, I flew into a rage. I beat her so brutally that a large bruise formed on her abdomen before I threw her down the well. It was a terrifying realization of my past sins. The fortune-teller sent me to a shaman. Laughing and crying hysterically, she proclaimed that the girl had returned for revenge as the baby my aunt was about to give birth to. She warned me never to meet the child until it turned 1 year old. A month later, my cousin was born. Coincidentally, my aunt's mother-in-law named her Sean. Even more chillingly, my uncle lifted the baby's shirt to reveal a large birthmark on her stomach, in the exact spot where the servant's bruise had been. Terrified, I left immediately. Later, my mother had to set up a memorial altar to apologize to Sean's spirit. Only after the baby's first birthday did the nightmare stop. I finally dreamed of a young woman coming to me and crying, and the shaman confirmed that the cycle of resentment and debt had finally ended. It was a harrowing journey through time and karma, but I'm relieved that the grudge from a past life has finally been laid to rest, and we can both move forward in peace. When I was 14, my dad and I took a road trip to visit my uncle. As night fell, the car suddenly stalled even though we had just filled up the tank. My dad went outside to check the engine. While sitting inside, I heard footsteps coming from behind the car, but when I looked out, I saw nothing. Luckily, the engine eventually started back up. A short while later, we pulled into a gas station. My dad told me to go into the convenience store to pay and grab some snacks. The station was eerily quiet. When I stepped inside, the man behind the counter stared at me intensely. He was thin, wearing clothes that were far too small for him, with a cold, sharp gaze. Instead of a greeting, he sneered, "You know, kid, I'm not actually the cashier." I glanced behind the counter and was horrified to see bodies piled on the floor. Realizing I had seen them, he stopped laughing. I screamed and bolted toward the car, and the man chased after me with a knife. Seeing the danger, my dad quickly locked all the car doors. The man frantically smashed at the windows, cursing and threatening to kill me. I hid in the back seat and eventually fainted from the sheer terror. When I woke up, the police had surrounded the scene. It turned out the man was an escaped convict who had murdered the station employees just before we arrived. The footsteps I heard when the car broke down had been his. He had been stalking us the entire time. On Christmas, when I was 25, I took a 4-hour road trip to visit a friend. Around 6 o'clock p.m., a massive blizzard hit, burying the roads in snow. I had no choice but to pull into a deserted gas station for shelter. Inside the shop, a man with greasy long hair and a heavy hooded coat walked in. He sat just a few seats away from me, incessantly blowing cigarette smoke in my direction while staring at me with a ferocious glare. Infuriated, I told him to stop, but he only responded with the terrifying smile. While I was on the phone with my friend, he stared intently at my device before finally leaving. Before exiting, he let out a loud shout that startled everyone in the shop. When the storm finally cleared, I got back in my car to continue the journey. In the middle of a desolate stretch of road, I suddenly heard heavy breathing right against the back of my neck. Looking through the rearview mirror, I saw the strange man from the gas station looming in the back seat, smiling at me. I slammed on the brakes and bolted out of the car, running for my life. He chased me relentlessly, brandishing a knife. Just as I reached the point of despair, my friend arrived in their car to pick me up. When the police later inspected my vehicle, they found the back seats slashed to ribbons, but the madman was never caught. During my teens, my family vacationed in a village near a forest rumored to be haunted. My cousin invited us all to play hide and seek at midnight in a cemetery deep within the woods, with a strict rule: no phones or flashlights. Around 2 a.m., the cemetery was eerily silent. Suddenly, we heard the sound of digging. Looking into the distance, we saw an old man with shaggy hair and filthy clothes. He was panting heavily as he dug into a grave with his bare hands. All of us were frozen in terror, not daring to move an inch. My cousin signaled for us to sneak away quietly, but unfortunately, we stepped on a dry branch. The old man spun around instantly, his face twisting into a horrific, grotesque smirk. We screamed and bolted, running for our lives through the dark. A few days later, we discovered that he was actually a wanted criminal who specialized in stealing corpses to hide and smuggle illegal drugs. In 2016 in Michigan, while walking home from school, I passed by a dilapidated building with no windows. As I was listening to music, I suddenly heard a piercing scream coming from inside. Driven by curiosity, I approached the building and peered through a hole in the door. The scene inside made me nauseous. A man dressed in black, wearing a mask, was holding a blood-stained hammer. On the floor, a woman covered in bruises and blood was kneeling in agony. The man and I locked eyes. A few seconds later, hearing his footsteps approaching the door, I pretended to hold up my phone as if I were negotiating or calling for help, but he suddenly slammed the door shut. I bolted and immediately called 911. The police arrived at the scene very quickly, but he had already managed to escape and had scrubbed the place clean. All that remained were a few traces of blood and hair. To this day, that case remains an unsolved mystery.